in this week's Parsha, as I mentioned in Shul tonight, there is, I believe, at least 10 times where the phrase is used, Hamakim asher yivchar Hashem, or Hamakim asher yivchar, the place that Hashem will choose, which is referring to the location of the Beis Hamikdash, of where it's going to be in Yerushalayim. The Mishkan was not the Makim asher yivchar Hashem, ki lo basem adayim el hamnucha nachal. You didn't yet come to your final place where you had to be. When it was finally built in Yerushalayim, that was the Makim asher yivchar Hashem. The interesting thing is, and the Rebbe is going to point it out, is this description, Hamakim, the place, because the actual physical location was very crucial to the Beis Hamikdash, more so than the Mishkan, which was traveling and did not have one set location. It was here, it was there, it was different places, and that essentially, that's where really the idea of the Sikh is going to go with. So first he's...
The Maimer we just had in Chayenu, we just finished, was about the Beis Hamikdash. It focuses the...
So he's going to start by analyzing what the Rambam says about one particular aspect of the building of the Beis Hamikdash, which seems to be a very minor aspect, but the Rebbe is going to make a big deal about it, because the very fact that the Rambam has to point this out, the Rebbe is going to derive something amazing from it. Kasva Rambam b'Hilchos Beis Hamikdash Hamikdash kuloi loy hoya b'mishor el b'mayla ahar v'hoylach mavayres protech elukim v'aliyas chol. The Mikdash was it was on an incline of a mountain. The Harabais, the Temple Mount, went up, and so too the height of the Beis Hamikdash went to different levels. He gets till the end of the section called the Chel. Then there's 12 steps till he gets the Ezra's Nashim, the women's courtyard. So again, all these areas are specifically, the area itself was flat, and then there was steps to go up to the next level. It wasn't, the whole Beis Hamikdash was on an incline. It was first one level, then you went up steps, another level, flat, another level, and so on. And he says, there was 15 steps that you went up. Then the whole Yisrael courtyard they went up was flat. It was the height of 1 cubit. From there he enters the big hall by 12 steps. The Heichel, the final section of the building of the Beis Hamikdash, was all on the same height. Usually, the Rambam, right, it wasn't flat, but it was on an incline. Usually the Rambam will just tell you the information, what it is. He doesn't have to tell you the negative. It wasn't this. He's going to tell you one thing, you're going to know it, but it wasn't. And not only that, but and not only that, the Rebbe is going to point out, he starts off with the negative. He doesn't start off by saying what it was, and then he says, but not flat. No, he starts off first of all saying it wasn't flat, it was by an incline. Why? בהמשך למשכן שעשה משה רבינו במדבר, כמו שכתוב בתחילת הלכות בית הבחירה, וכמו שחזר ופירש שם גם אצל הדברים בבניין הבית. The Rambam says that there's really one mitzvah, the mitzvah of building the portable Mishkan in the wilderness, and the Mikdash that was in Yerushalayim is really one mitzvah, except that in the wilderness, because of the situation in the wilderness, like he's going to mention later, it had to be a bit different, and the Beis Hamikdash, which was already a place that was established and settled in Yerushalayim, the building was different. But essentially, it's one mitzvah. In Parshas Truma, where it talks about the tabernacle, where it talks about the Mishkan, it says, V'asali Migdash, they shall make for me a sanctuary. And that V'asali Migdash applies both for the Mishkan that was in the Midbar and the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple that was in Yerushalayim. And we see that by even the different things that were there in the Beis Hamikdash that were similar to and reflected the same things that took place in the Mishkan. So he says in the top of the second column, "Ve'elu hein advarim shem ikar bebinyan habayis. Oisem by Kodesh Hakodoshim v'yil lefnei hakodesh makom echad v'anikra ulam v'shloshtam nikroim heichel." So first of all, there is the building itself. The building itself had the Holy of Holies. That's where the Aron was. There was a place called Holy, where that was where the inner Mizbeach was, the Shulchan was there, the Menorah was there, and then there was a place called the Hall. And they make another enclosure further away from this building, around this building, an outer enclosure that were similar to the enclosure of the courtyard, the curtains of the courtyard that was in the wilderness. Anything in this outer enclosure is similar to the enclosure that was in the courtyard in the Midbar, in the wilderness, and that was called Oil Moed, and everything is called Mikdash. In other words, the Rambam is showing how what the Beis Hamikdash had reflected and corresponded to what was there in the Mishkan, because it's all one continuation. Mishkan Valderich ze kosav lahalm behilchus beis abchidam legabe sholish machnes shahoyev b'midbar sheyesh gam kenegdon ledoyraseinu. That there is, just like there was the three encampments in the Midbar, it was called Machne Shechina, Machne Levia, Machne Yisrael, the same thing. There was a similar thing, the area of Yerushalayim, the area of the Har HaBayis, the area of the Beis Hamikdash, these corresponded as well. So we see a very strong continuation and correspondence between what took place in the Mishkan and what took place in the Beis Hamikdash Yerushalayim. Therefore, the Rambam had to inform us and tell us, but there is in one way that they're different. We would have thought the Mishkan was all on flat ground. So maybe the Beis Hamikdash should also be on flat ground. It had to be on the incline, on the rise of the mountain. Yet, he goes on the second page, Sefer Yad HaChazaka, which is the name of the Rambam, called Yad HaChazaka. Yad is for the number 14, the 14 volumes of the Rambam. Toichnoi halachas, it's out to tell us things that matter for halacha. Moving Shatir Rambam Hamikdash Kulay Loyhoy B'Mishor El V'Mayla Ahor Ein Rakne Shekain Hoysa Tzuras Abayv Poil. The Rambam is not telling us history, that this is the way the Beis Hamikdash was. It was on the mountain. The fact that the Rambam is a halacha sefer, so it's telling us what the halacha is, that this has to be that way. Shema Achar Sh'Hamikdash Hayabone El Ahora Hoylech Voyle B'Shpuam Hayahechrach Livnes Es Chalke Abayz Zel L'Mayl Mezer. That's not the case. The case wasn't that, you built it on a mountain, so if you build something on a mountain, you can't help yourself. It's going to be all different types of heights. That's not what the Rambam is saying. Alazeu inyan shel halacha b'mikdash kulay u'b'shnei hapratim hein b'shlila v'hein b'chiv tapra sagun kalam. Hamikdash kulay aleph tzarech liyas shel loy b'mishor loy hoya b'mishor beis ala tzarech liyas b'mayla ahor. It cannot be on flat ground, and it has to be on an incline going up higher on the mountain. And that's part of the halacha of what the Beis Hamikdash, how the Beis Hamikdash has to be built, just like all the other halachas that the Rambam explains over there, different details about how the Beis Hamikdash has to be built. V'loi hamigdash kuloi hoya b'mayla har v'loi. He didn't say hamigdash kuloi b'mayla har v'loi b'mishar. You remember I mentioned this before. He could have started with a positive. What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to put it going up, and then he could have said, but don't make it flat like the Mishkan was. The Rambam doesn't say it that way. He says just the opposite. He wants to emphasize, don't make it flat. Don't make it on a flat place. It has to be on an incline.
By saying it has to be on the mountain, automatically it wouldn't be on a flat. So,
but again, to recognize that this is actually something that's so strong and powerful, he wants to negate it first.
Right.
He wants to exclude it first.
The Misha is part of the halacha.
It's part of the halacha. Mashma she'ein ze'inu shalachatchil b'vad al ze'o t'nai li'ikuva. There's sometimes situations where there's a halacha of what's the best way to do things. But if you didn't do it that way, you don't have to do it over. By the Rambam saying, Loi hoya b'mishar, beginning with the concept that it wasn't on a flat plane, that comes to tell us that this is of necessity. You cannot build the Beis Hamikdash any other way except on an incline, except on a rise. And if you didn't, you got to do it over. You got to fix it up. The Rebbe asks, "Me'achar shebinyan hamikdash hu hemshach shel mitzvos v'asli migdash kiyuma hischov Mishkan v'advarim shein ikar b'binyan habayis hem bedugim sadvarim sheb Mishkan kanal ma'u hezber lakach shebinyan zeh tzarach hamikdash li is shoynem in Mishkan." Why is it that way? If the Beis Hamikdash, we said, is all part of the same mitzvah of the Mishkan, why is it different? Why is the Mishkan going to be in a flat area, but the Mikdash should not be in a flat place? So the Rebbe says, what's so terrible? We have other things that the Beis Hamikdash was different than the Mishkan. V'af al pi shebeis hamikdash hayeshoyna min hamishkan beribi pratim hachal b'midas hamikdash. The size, the Mishkan was a lot smaller. The Beis Hamikdash was a lot bigger. V'kama pratim beguf habinyan. It was different. Page 73. So he's saying, first of all, that doesn't negate the question that we just now asked. Harei aleph gamba hem tzarich liyas tam. The truth is, many things you don't really understand. What's the reason? Why, if the Mikdash is a continuation of the Mishkan, why are these things different? But Beis, a second thing is, bekama mehem atam poshut. Some of the differences, many of the differences, there's a very obvious reason why there's a difference. Kigoy. Hamikdash hayibonu gam me'avonim kiyoytze b'zeh gadol v'gavoya harbe yoytzer min hamishkan v'cholum kivin shamad l'doyres v'makom echad kiyoytze b'zeh. The Mishkan was portable. It was supposed to be a movable thing, so you couldn't make it out of stones, and you couldn't make it a huge size, or else you wouldn't be able to carry it. But the Beis Hamikdash, which was meant to stand over there for generations, so therefore you build it bigger, you build it with heavier materials, with stone. So that's a logical reason why the Mishkan was different than the Beis Hamikdash. Gimel. Be'inyan zeh davke matzinu hadgasha v'protis gedoylo shehamikdash kulei lahay v'mishar k'may hamishkan el v'may lahar v'chol. Even though there are other differences, we said, between the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash, but there wasn't that emphasis. The Rambam doesn't make an emphasis. Not like the Mishkan. Don't think that the Beis Hamikdash, you can, let's say, make it with curtains and beams. No, the Beis Hamikdash was made with stone. The Rambam doesn't say that. Don't think like the Mishkan was this height and this width and this size. No, the Beis Hamikdash is that height. The Rambam doesn't say it. All of a sudden, when it comes to this seemingly minor detail, the Rambam says, the Mikdash was not on a flat ground. The Mikdash was on an incline going up higher and higher. There is an extra emphasis over here in making this distinction between the Mikdash and the Mishkan. The question is, why is there that emphasis? So the Rebbe says, really, it's so geschmack. When you think about it, it's like so straight. It's not any big, deep concept. It's a deep concept, but it's very straight. Gimel. V'yashleim rabir b'zem chiluki ha'mekoymes shahoye b'mikdash b'mayla ha'har kach sha'hiluch mechelik echad l'chaveira hahoye b'ofen sha'aliyah b'maylas הם בהסם לקח שבכל אחד ממקומות אלו הויסה תוספת ועלייה בקדושה ביחס למוקם שלפניו. כמו שכתוב ברמב"ם בפרק הבא. Every location that had a separation between them and went up a few steps higher, it was a different state of holiness. There were only, let's say, certain people allowed in one section, and others couldn't come into the other section. Kohanim could only enter certain sections. Yisraelim could only enter certain sections, etc., etc. In other words, every section had a distinct holiness. Corresponding to that distinct holiness, every section had this rise. Valpizi yesh loimer shedin zeh sha'amigdash kulei lahoy b'misher ela v'mayla ahar noiveya me'aliyos hadargis shebekdush sa'amigdash kol chelik shebemigdash hagavoya b'shetach mekayma yesh by Kedusha nailus yoser. The sections, being that they were spiritually elevated, so it manifested itself also in the physical location, as we're going to explain why that's different than the Mishkan. So the physical area that was more spiritually elevated was also more physically elevated.
But by the Mishkan, also there were levels of...
There was levels of holiness, but not in the place.
Yeah.
That's going to be the point. V'lechein, din zehu rak b'mikdash v'loi b'mishkan. Ki inyan zeh shechiluk ha'darga shebekdusha. Yotzrim din l'gabe shetach mekayma. Hu behesem legeder hakedusha. Listen to this spinning. Shenischadish b'mikdash l'gabe kedusha ha'mishkan. This was something unique that the Beis Hamikdash had, that there could be the physical ground. You remember we started off Hamokai Masher Yivchar Hashem, that the physical location would be impacted by the holiness. Top of the next column, Vaz Bora Bezeh. Yesh Naib Chiluk Ikri Bein HaMishkan and Bein Beis Hamikdash. HaMishkan Hoye Binyan Arai was a temporary dwelling of Hashem. K'may shekosov Eya Misalach Ba'oil of a Mishkan. Ubalosh Naramba Manal HaMishkan Shasa Moshe Hoyel Fisha was a temporary place. Mashenki Beis Hamikdash Hoye Diras Keva. It was already a set place. It's not like a tent where Lahavdil people go camping. It's Hashem's home, where He's actually going to live over there and settled. So he says, "B'loshna Rambam kivin shenivna Hamikdash b'Yerushalayim nesru kol ha'makayim kulon livnas ben bayis l'Hashem u'lahakriv ben korban ve'ein shom bayis l'doida doidas al b'Yerushalayim levad b'Har Moriah." Beforehand, when there was even when the Mishkan came into Eretz Yisrael, and they had it in Noiv and Givon and Gilgal, and they had it in Shiloh, all these places did not become the final resting place. It did not become. Hashem was still on the move. He was still not settled. He was still living out of suitcases. This wasn't yet his home. His true home happened in the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. Ubaloshna Rambam. Yeah, we said that right. V'achiluk b'neim begeder hakdushahu b'mishkan hoysa chaloysa hakdusha beikir bebinyan v'chalakav. Penny. It was just the building of the Mishkan, meaning the different the kroshim, the yeriyos, the curtains, and the beams and boards and so on. That was something that was set for the duration of the Mishkan, at least until they get to Shiloh. These kroshim, these boards and beams, and these curtains were used the whole time. So those were set, those were established. So the holiness was maintained in those items. Ubahem lo haya shum shinui. Avol Beis Hamikdash haya gam kedushas makom, the actual place of the Beis Hamikdash. Etzem makom hamikdash niskadesh ubishnei inyanim. Davke b'nogel leBeis Hamikdash nemar b'parshasenu, as I pointed out. Hamokim asher yivchar Hashem Elokeichem boy. That is the place. That is the location. Beis Haya Maisa Kiddush Al Karka Ritpas Hamikdash Chulu. There was actually a way of making, they actually sanctified not just the building in general, the actual floor. We said before that the curtains and the boards of the Mishkan were, how were they sanctified? Through the Shemen HaMishcha, the oil of anointment. But the ground had no sanctity placed on it, except for the fact that when the Mishkan rested on it, we'll talk about that, so it derived some sanctity from that, but it didn't really become sanctified. But the Mikdash, the actual area, before even the Beis Hamikdash was built, was made sanctified. So the Rebbe is going to challenge this with a halacha. We know that when the Soita woman drinks from the Soita waters, there's a certain mixture that the Kohen makes, and one of it is he takes from the sand, the earth of the floor of the Mishkan, and he has to mix it into those waters that she has to drink. So the fact that he's taking from the earth of the Mishkan, it can only be the earth of the Mishkan. You can't go to the earth outside the Mishkan. So that must mean that there's something holy and sanctified in the earth of the Mishkan that wasn't outside of the Mishkan. So why are you telling me that only in the Beis Hamikdash is the place sanctified and it's made holy, but the place where the Mishkan was did not have any holiness? It was only the edifice, it was only the enclosure that had holiness. We find that by the Soita woman, you had to take the offer, you had to take the sand or the earth from the floor of the Mishkan. That's the question now. So the Rebbe says, this is only temporary. What happens when the Mishkan moved to the next location? You couldn't go back to where it was before and take from the dust or earth that was there. No, you can only take from where the Mishkan was located at this time. So you see that, again, it was only a temporary sanctity. Beis, afilu ba'oise shal, lo'hoyezev machmas kedushas hamokim va'karka mitzad atzmam. El mitzad oyel moed ha'iris va'kroshim ha'mishkan sha'amad al karkazu. The fact that the Mishkan stood on this ground, that's what made the ground appropriate for being used in this Soita waters that had to be mixed in. But it's not that the ground itself was by in and of itself imparted with an essential holiness. The Mishkan moved from place to place. Sometimes it could be there a long time. Rashi says they were in one place for 20 years in the wilderness, even though they traveled for 40 years. But of that time, they could be a whole year in a place. They could be 20 years in a place. But regardless of how long or how little time they spent in the place, once they moved to the next location, the place where it was beforehand did not retain any of the holiness. All the holiness left with the building. We know that the Yidden were prohibited from going up on the mountain because it was filled with the sanctity of the holiness of Hashem by the giving of the Torah. Once the shofar blew, they were permitted. That meant that Hashem's Shekhinah had left the mountain, and they were permitted to go up on the mountain because the mountain never retained any of the holiness. Just like when the Mishkan moved from this location to the next location, the first location did not maintain any of the holiness. This is an amazing thing. You don't need a building to be able to offer the korbanos. Even though the Beis Hamikdash is a place that the Rambam designates, it's a building you're supposed to build to have a place to offer korbanos. But once the sanctity took place on that area, you could bring korbanos without an actual building. Shemakrivim korbanos kulam afal pish ein shom bayis bonui va'oichlin kodesh hakodoshim b'chol ha'azara afal pish yicharev ve'ein mukefet mechitzes. There is not only an obligation to bring the korbanos in the place of holiness, but there's also certain korbanos that are called kodesh hakodoshim can only be consumed and eaten within the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. So what happens if you have a courtyard, but there's no enclosure? You could still eat from it. You could still eat those korbanos in that place that was designated as the courtyard. You have no roof, you have no walls, you have nothing except for the location, because the location itself already has the Kedusha, already has the sanctity. Ki hamokim atzmoi niskadish mipnei hashchina, hamokim asher yivchar, like we said 10 times in this week's parsha, habchira hi b'mokim, v'lechein hakedusha kavua sham lo'elam voed. So now, once we explain that difference between the Mikdash and the Mishkan, we'll understand why the Mishkan was flat entirely, and the Mikdash was higher and higher based on the different types of levels of holiness. Al Pizem moving atam shedin zeh. Sham Mikdash kulay, top of page 75. Loihoya b'mishar el b'mayla har, uprote achilukim ba'aliyas memokim lemokim shel Beis Hamikdash. Heim Chidush Hahaya b'Mikdash Davke. Davke b'Mikdash. Sheboy HaKedusha hi b'shayches l'mokim gufa. HaMokim hu mokim asher yivchar Hashem goymer. L'tochen loymar shechilukei HaKedusha shu b'Mikdash yotzrim chilukim b'mokim HaMikdash. B'goyva hashetach sheboy nivdal mokim echad mimishneu. Ki Kedushas HaMokim shu b'Beis HaMikdash ein rak Kedusha klalis. Asher chala b'shava b'Beis Hamikdash kulay ela yesh chiluke dargis b'kedushas hamakim behesam ledargis hakedusha shel chelkei habayis hahechel v'azaret. You could say, the place of the Beis Hamikdash, the entire location is holy. That's what you could have said. Comes the Rambam and teaches us that the holiness of the area of the geographical location of the Beis Hamikdash, just like the different rooms in the Beis Hamikdash indicated different levels of holiness, even the actual physical place, the place of, let's say, the courtyard was not the same holiness as, let's say, the Har HaBayis, the Temple Mount, and the place of the Heichal, the inner enclosure, was a different level of holiness than the outer place, than where the Azara was, regardless of, like we said, the physical edifice. וגם הקדושה המיוחדת של המקום הפרטי קבוע לעולם, אף על פי שאין שם בייס בנוי, כמובן גם בדברי הרמב"ם הנ"ל שאויכלו עם קודש הקדושים שמקום אכילוסם בזור בלבד, בכל הזור אף בשקרבה. We see again that this holiness of the place is so much embedded in the physical location that even when the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, we are still allowed to eat if we would be able to bring sacrifices, which is for a different reason we can't bring sacrifices, either because we're impure or because we don't know the exact location of where the Mizbeach exactly supposed to be, and the place of the Mizbeach is very exact. So, but theoretically, if we would be able to bring a sacrifice, we would be allowed to eat those things that have to be eaten only in the courtyard and can't be eaten farther out, because the actual physical area of the courtyard has already the Kedusha, the holiness involved. That's all the Beis Hamikdash. Masha'en kein hamishkan loyhoya ba'ifin shel kviyas b'makim. Loyhoya ze makim asher yivchar Hashem. That's not what we say about the Mishkan. El kedusha soy hoyse bechelkei oil moed hakrashim va'yiriyas v'chulu. It was the building materials of the Mishkan that were sanctified. ולכן החילוק שבקדושת חלקי המשכן לא נמשך ולא נקבע וחל על המקום שבמדבר שבויס ובויס אברייך הנויס המשכן. It did not permeate the physical location wherever the Mishkan was. ומטעם זה היה מקום המשכן במישור היינו שבשטח המשכן גוף לא היה חילוקים בין מקום חלק אחד במשכן למשנהו. So even though, like Rabbi Pini brought up, yes, there were certain areas in the Mishkan, just like in the Beis Hamikdash, where only certain people are allowed to go in, where it was only allowed to be done the avodah. There were different areas, but the holiness of that area was only about the different distinctions made by the divisions in it, but nothing about the ground. It had nothing to do with the floor, and therefore the floor didn't reflect those different elevations of holiness. ולכן הדגיש הרמב"ם תחת הסקנד קולום חילוק זה שבין המשכן למקדש, אף שיש להם כמה וכמה חילוקים ביניהם כנ"ל, כי דווקא בזה שהמקדש כולו לא היה במישור אל ממעלה ההר חילוקי העלי שבחלקי המקדש בא לידי ביטוי חידוש עיקרי במקדש ביחס למשכן שביועסי המקום אשר יבחר השם פעלו המקדש וחלקיו על מקום על קדושת המקום. This is important for the Rambam to emphasize because this helps us understand the type of sanctity that the Beis Hamikdash had, different and unique than the Mishkan. That's why the Rambam has to emphasize, and this is something li'ikuva that you cannot avoid it, that it must have different levels because it was different than the Mishkan. Because the Mishkan did not sanctify the place, the Mikdash was sanctified the place. So now, the obvious question, which we left off in Shul today by Rabbi Pini, is there was one part of the Beis Hamikdash, the holiest part in the Beis Hamikdash, that we know about did not have any difference between it and the area preceding it. The Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Hakodoshim, did not rise up higher than the Heichal, than the Kodesh. Based on everything we just now said, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, the most holy place in the Beis Hamikdash, that should have been unbelievably higher. So how come, after what we just now said, that every level reflected the spiritual elevation when it comes to the Holy of Holies, it was the same level, like the level preceding it? Let's see it inside. שהעלiyas בשטח המקום הן בהסם לדרגת השעינס והעלiyas שבקדושת המקום שבככל שקדושת של חלק זה במקדש ניילס יויסר היה שטח מקום הגבוה יויסר למה לא היו מיילס וריבוי מיילס. There should have been many steps לעלiyas לקודש הקדושים. הלוי קודש הקדושים היה נבדל בקדושת מכל חלקי הבית כשמוי Kodesh Hakodoshim. What does it mean, Holy of Holies? Even in comparison to holy, it is even holier. וכמו שביר הרמב"ם בפרק הבא שהקדושה עליונה ביוסר בבייס קודש הקדושים שנכנס לשם אל הכהן גדול ביום הכיפורים בשעת העבודה. The Kodesh HaKadoshim was so holy that it was only one person could go there, only one time a year, and even during that one time a year, it could only be when they're doing the avodah. He didn't have carte blanche that the Kohen Gadol, when it came Yom Kippur, all the 24 hours of Yom Kippur he could enter. No, it was only during doing the service. So that means this is like something amazingly different than the rest of the Beis Hamikdash. Exactly. V'im kain haya all of Leah's gavoya harbe yoyser b'shetach makoyim, top of page 76. So here the Rebbe is going to start using Chassidus to explain it. Often the Rebbe says that there are certain questions that are like in the revealed part of Torah that the only way we can understand it is by seeing how Chassidus looks at things. HaMishkan shaya diras are keviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu haya asui me'etzim, made out of wood, kroshim, the boards, the beams, which is from tzemeach, plant life. It was from the vegetable kingdom. Yeriyos, the curtains that were on top, hasuyas bechelka minachai, some of it was from the animal kingdom. V'rak hakarka she'Allah hukam hamishkan lefi shah, he said doimim offer. Only the temporary earth on the ground, that was made from the inanimate. The whole world, Chassidus always speaks about, is divided into 4 levels. Doimim, the inanimate, Semeach, the plant kingdom, vegetation, Chai, the animal kingdom, and Medaber, human beings. So the Mishkan had these 3 levels in the building of the Mishkan. Masha Enkin Beis Hamikdash, Shayadiras Keva Shal Kodesh Baruch Hu, Hayabanui Be'ikir Ma'avanim. It was primarily made out of stones. Ve'ein boinim by 8 boilet klal al oy ba'avanim b'levenim. The Rambam's cautions there is a prohibition, min ha-Torah, to have any protruding wood in the Beis Hamikdash.
There's no wood.
There's a prohibition, that's what I said. It's a prohibition to have protruding wood in the Beis Hamikdash. It could be inside, hidden within the walls, but it couldn't be protruding. Meaning the holiest place, the holiest type of building, that's even holier than the Mishkan, was entirely of the lowest category.
He's also bringing out over here that even the Mishkan the doimim, because he wants to bring out elevating the doimim, that even the doimim that was in the Mishkan was only lefishah.
Very good, right. Vatam bezer mavor ikir in yonish al Mishkan haya loikal kach lefol shinui kavua begashmis ha'olam ela l'shakef eseder hishtalshlus shala oilmas. This is something that the Rebbe brings down often, that Mamar Chassidus speaks about it, and even in Mefarshim it speaks about it, the commentaries in the Torah, that the physical Mishkan and the physical Beis Hamikdash mirrored the spiritual worlds. And all these different categories, like we said before. Daimim, Tzumeach, Chai, Medaber, V'lachein, Hoya Binyan HaMishkan Behesem, it mirrors, it corresponds to. V'lachein, Hoya Binyan HaMishkan Behesem, La'oifen, Sheboinim, Shachim, Ha'inyanim, Beseder, Ishtal Shlos. Michsa HaMishkan, La'mayla, what was the uppermost part of Mishkan? Hoya Mimin Chai, was from the animal kingdom. The majority of the curtains that made up were from the animal kingdom. And also then there was other parts of a few of the curtains, and the boards of the Mishkan was from the plant kingdom. Well, the mataf is even lower. Hadonim v'karka mishkan ha'im mekesav v'ofar min hadoimim. The sockets that the boards were in, and also the floor, was from the inanimate. Because this reflects Seder Ishtalshlus. Exactly. The higher, more spiritual things are more elevated, and the less spiritual it is as we go down, and the lowest is the least spiritual. So the Mishkan reflected this type of order, the Seder Ishtalshlus of all the worlds that work this way. You go from spiritual to less spiritual to even less spiritual. HaYisra v'achidush Beis Hamikdash b'yachas l'Mishkan hu bekach shal yodei nishlemes hakavon nisava kodesh baruch hu li'yisroi dir b'tachtoinim. Hashem wanted a home down here. He didn't want the spiritual worlds. He didn't want this chain descent. All of that was only for us down here. Dafka. Hainu shakdusha shras ashchina tumshach besoicha oilam v'tachder boy. Ad ledarga chipchusa shebegashmis oilam suga doimim shechayusei v'ruchniyusei eina nirs begili. When you see an animal, when you see even a plant, you see there's some life to it. You see the growth of the plant, you see the life in an animal. But when it comes to an inanimate object, a rock, you see earth, you see water, you don't see any life to it. That is where Hashem wanted to appear. Hashem wanted to make himself at home and to become visible in things that in and of themselves have no spirituality visible in them. Hashem wanted to raise up the physical. He wanted to raise up the most lowest things. So he placed the Mikdash on a mountain, which the mountain is earth, the lowest type of thing, an inanimate thing that rises up. Because he's trying to show this is the purpose. The mission is to take the lowest and elevate it. And therefore, the holier in the location in the Beis Hamikdash, the higher, the more elevated was the physical, inanimate part of the Beis Hamikdash, because that's the whole purpose, to elevate the inanimate part of this world higher and higher, because Hashem wants to have a home in the lowest parts of the world, in the most inanimate things. Yeah. That wasn't the purpose of the Mishkan. It wasn't about permeating the inanimate. Ha'aretz shein lamata manum hine ashras hashchina boyu k'tushosei ki ilu nishru ki metzias b'fnei atzma v'loi niru u'bo l'dei bitu b'makom hagashmi. It didn't express itself in the physical place. The physical place did not reflect the different divisions and heights and elevations in the Mishkan. ולכן אף על פי שבמשכן היה חילוקים בדרגת הקדושה, מכל מקום היה משכן במקומי בעולם הזה, כולוי במישור, like the Rambam says, ולוי מוגבס, תapa 77, ולוי מוגבה בהסם למיילס הקדושה. המשכן היה במישור בהשוואה אחת, אפילו עם מקום המדבר. Chassidus always speaks about the wilderness as being a very low place. The fact that physically a wilderness, a desert, is not a place of growing things, and it's not civilized, people don't live over there, that's indicative of its spiritual emptiness and its spiritual chaos. If you look at the ground in the Mishkan, and you look at the ground in the Midbar, they're totally identical. And not only that, a minute before, this same Mishkan was the ground of the Midbar, and a minute later, after the Mishkan moves, it's just as much Midbar as it was before. Because the Mishkan was not about transforming and elevating the inanimate, the lowest part of this world, like the Mikdash was about, that was about the transforming of the lowest. Vav. Now we can understand about the Kodesh Hakodoshim. Why was the Kodesh Hakodoshim not distinct, not elevated by even many more steps than the room before it? Al Pisa moving Gamatam, Shekodesh Hakodoshim Shebamikdash. Hamokim HaMekudesh BeYoser Lo Haya Nivdol BeGayvoi Mehechel HaMikdash. In Yinzeh Shakadusha V'Aruchni Shal HaMikdash Poyalois Al Ha'aliyah Shebemokim HaGashmi וمטעם זה מקום אחד היה גבוה משני ובהסם לחילוקים שבקדושתם ניתן לאמרי לגבי מדרגס אלו בקדושה שבהן הדרגה התחתונה היא בערך לעליונה. הניילס ממנו רק ב-12 מיילס כיוצא בזה. He used the word mila, it means steps. But mila could mean also qualities, levels. When you talk about the steps between one location in the Beis Hamikdash and another location, that means these steps are 12 levels, 12 milos that you have to go up to reach to the next stage. You cannot make such a limited type of elevation for the Kodesh Hakodoshim. אבל כשמדובר במדרגה בקדושה הניילס בין הרויך עד שהיא למעלה מגדר מעלה מטה, הרי ליועסה דרגה ניילס בין הרויך אין מקום לכך שהדבר יסבטה במספר מיילס בגובה מודד ומוגבל ובמילא בגובה מקום גשמי. When you're dealing with a level like the Kodesh Hakodoshim, that's completely incomparable to anything prior to it. If you can make 5 steps, you can make 10 steps, you can make 100 steps, you're never going to be able to reach to that level through physical steps. It has no concept of steps. That steps shows that there's some type of relationship between the upper level and the lower level. וזהו החילוק שבין שאר חלקי המקדש ובין קודש הקדושים. בחלקי המקדש החלק האחד נעלה משנהו. אבל ההפרש הוא בערך מסוים, there's some type of comparison between the level that was lower by 12 steps and the level that was higher by 12 steps. כל חלק יש ערך לחלק מדרגס הקדושה הסמוכים לו. ובהסם לחילוק הערך ביניהם, יש חילוק ביניהם גם במספר ובגובה המיילש ובין מוקם למוקם, כך שאחד גבוה מחבר גם בגשמיס. And also there's a difference in how many steps. Some were 12 steps, some were 15 steps, some was 1 cubit, because these different elevations were indicative and related to how far and how much higher level A was from level B, or level B was from level A. אבל בקדושה של קודש הקדושים שלא יברך כלל לשאר חלקי המקדש והוא ניילה בכלל מגדר מיילה המטה שהרי שם היה במוקם עצמי גילוי של עצמוסי מהוסי יסברך שהוא נמנע נמנועס. There was a certain powerful revelation of Hashem in the physical place that showed how Hashem is totally beyond the impossible. B'mokim ha'orin she'einem min ha'midah. Chassidus always mentions this amazing miracle that took place in the Kodesh Hakodoshim, that the physical location of the Aron of the ark that held in it the luchos, the tablets, could not be measured. Which means you would see it there, sitting on the ground or on the Even Hashsia, on the rock over in the Kodesh Hakodoshim. If you were to measure it from one end of the Aron to one wall and one end of the Aron to the other wall, it wouldn't come up that occupied space. So it's supposed to be a certain type of length. That length was not decreased by the Aron, which means that Chazal called Mokum Aron Ein Min Amidah, that's only something that can be possible from Hashem's very essence, that's beyond any limitation. When you're talking about something that's so elevated, so then it's impossible to even signify it or symbolically indicate a spiritual height by giving it X amount of steps. No steps can capture that.
But not doing good at any elevation at all is also sort of disrespecting that you're putting it on.
Sometimes giving respect with certain things is disrespectful. So, for example, if you're, it says there's an expression, the Gemara says that we on our own would not be able to praise Hashem, like it says in Shemoneh Esrei, Hakeil, Hagod, Hagibur, Hanoira, all these praises. The only reason why we have a right to say these praises about Hashem is because that's what Anshe Knesset Hagdolah with their prophecy established. Otherwise, it's an insult. Yeah. To praise Hashem with these things, it's like a minor thing. It's like saying, Bill Gates is so rich that he has millions of pennies. It's a joke. You're making fun of him. The same thing. When you start climbing, you start saying something, you start indicating that there's a difference, and it doesn't capture that, don't even begin. Don't even start. Now the Rebbe says another thing. Going to a deeper analysis, according to Chassidus, of the words of the Rambam. The Rambam, when he describes these different elevations, he doesn't just say that there was level A, then there's 15 steps, you go up to level B, then there's 12 steps, you go up to level C. He doesn't say that. He puts it on the person. He describes when a person enters the Har HaBayis, he goes so many steps, then he goes further, and then he reaches so many steps, and it's all talking about in a very subjective, human way. Why? Let's see this inside. This is a quote from the Rambam. He comes in from the eastern gate. He goes straight on flat ground until the end of the Chel. Then he goes up. Again he goes. And he goes up. All referring to the person. The person is going up, the person is going straight. It's not about the area, it's about the person. He could have just described it and said, the Ezras Nashim was here, and then there's 12 steps or 15 steps, wherever you go to Eretz Yisrael. No, he says a person that enters the Beis Hamikdash through the eastern gate goes and then rises up. And then he gets into Ezras Nashim, and then he goes and then he rises up. It's all about focused on the person. Yes, loymar shebekach meramaz Rambam shekasher Adam hoylech mit darge le darge bechol madreges halal bekedusha hadavar muchrach liyos ba'ofen shel oila lahavi la'aliyah ba'adam atzmai olav li'isroimim v'lalish medarge le darge. It's not just about the physical location of the Beis Hamikdash. The person needs to traverse that place. The person needs to travel, the person needs to rise. The experience of being in these different areas have to cause them to rise higher personally. Aval kishan nidenu madreges Kodesh Hakodoshim ein ze ba'ofen sha'adam hu hoylach va'oylash hu hoylach mis'ala ba'al yosef b'kodesh elo nimtza kuloi bebitel v'metzias lagamri kuloi b'shava. It's impossible. He is so totally nullified. He's totally sublimated to Hashem that he can't even be rising higher. He can't even be traveling. It's all the same. V'dvarim elu, final page, shayachim gam lebeis hamikdash hanimtza Besoicham Meshachanti Besoicham, it says that every single Jew has the Beis Hamikdash and the Mishkan within them. Lebechinas Kodesh Hakodoshim Shechenes Mikdashe Aprati Shel Kolechim Yisrael. Permeated the permeated halev. Bechinas Yichida Shebenefesh Sheba Ein Shum Tzir V'Agbolo. When we deal about the core of a Yid, the Yechida, there is no form to it, there's no limitations to it. There's no expansion of it. It's a core, essential pintel Yid, like we say in Yiddish. Nekudas Hayadus. The Indians are Nimras Bekut Shal Hayud, that Yud Kei Vav Kei hints also at the different levels in the Jew, and the point on top of the Yud of the Yud Kei Vav Kei is that essential core of the Jew. Umitzida kol Yehudi mevatlu misalkes atzmi v'retzoyni lebot leil v'yizbarach ubezehu etzem his kashrusay shalamayla megeder v'tziur yichid ol yachtach, like we say in the Hashanas Tfilas, bedugmas knisas kohen gadol kishliach kalamchi Yisrael v'chol makom shehem achas b'shana l'kodesh Hakodoshim. Every Jew has this holy of holies, and every Jew has within the depth of his heart this bond with Hashem, like the kohen gadol has as a representative of Klal Yisrael on Yom Kippur when he enters the Holy of Holies.